Hey, it's Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini. I post weekly videos right here on YouTube, and in this video tutorial, we are talking all about sewing patterns. The sewing patterns I'm going to be discussing are the type of patterns that you buy, whether it be online, as a downloadable file, online from some type of a shop that's then going to mail you a hard copy pattern, or the ones that you can get at most of your local fabric stores, craft stores, and big box stores and things like that, okay? So we're talking PDFs and regular hard copy patterns in this video. Now, if you're a part of any online groups or forums, or even that you follow some type of sewing blogs, you probably have sometime come across the term the Big Four. And this is a phrase that is used to refer to the Big Four pattern companies that you can often find at your local big box fabric store. So these are gonna be your McCall's, Butterick, Simplicity, and Vogue, which is kind of weird that they call them the Big Four, and even though they have different names, Butterick, McCall's, and Vogue are all the same company. And then Simplicity has their own, which are some of them titled Simplicity, and you'll also find them under the name New Look or Berta. So really they're more like 7 or maybe just 2 big companies. But there are a lot of different pattern companies, but when we talk about the typical run-of-the-mill standard commercial pattern, these are the ones that we're talking about. Then we also have what we call indie designers or independent pattern designers. And for whatever reason, a ton of independent pattern designers have popped up in the industry and on the market. Whether it's because some of the commercial patterns maybe didn't provide them the style or the fit, or the customization that they were looking for in patterns. Whatever it is, there are so many different independent pattern companies these days that if you're somebody who's looking to try your hand at garment sewing, there's definitely going to be one brand or style or something of pattern that you can find both to match your style and your body type. Now, to give you an idea of some similarities and differences that you'll find in the Big Four commercial patterns, and then also in some of the independent designers, let's talk a little bit about how they come, the packaging, right? Let me grab a couple here. All right, so the Big Four patterns that you'll find at the store, at your fabric store, big box store, they're typically gonna come in these paper envelopes, and they're all pretty much the same no matter which one of the companies that I mentioned earlier. You're gonna see one or more different looks, and whatever you see here typically will have a letter on the front next to whoever the model is, or sometimes it's just a sketch. Okay, whenever you see that, you'll know that the letter next to the actual model or illustration represents one of the different garments that you can make in this pattern. So this one, for example, says A, B, and C. That means that in this one packet, I can make all 3 of these different styles of tops with just this one pattern, okay? Now, this one here is an independent pattern design company called Colette Patterns. You can see that their packaging is a little bit different, still paper, but a little sturdier, and it's more like an envelope closure on the back with a little tab that slides in, okay? The sizing and all this pertinent information you'll find pretty much on the back of almost all of the patterns, whether they're a Big Four or an indie designer, but you can see that on the front on this one, it gives you version 1, version 2, and version 3. So there's a top, a long sleeve version of it as a dress, and then also the short sleeve version as a dress. So again, all the illustrations on the front here are different looks and styles that you can make with this one individual pattern. And here I have another indie designer, and this is Angela Wolf. This is for her jeans pattern, the Angel Boot Cut Jean pattern, and it comes in sizes 0 to 16, and you can see this is a chunky pattern packet because she includes the pattern pieces instead of in that thin tissue that you'll often find in your commercial patterns. You see this is a Big Four, this is McCall's. You see this tissue paper? You'll open it up, press it out nice and flat with a dry iron. Don't add any moisture to it because the paper will bubble up on you. It's pretty thin. You don't want to add moisture to it. But with a nice warm dry iron, you can smooth out all the creases and then look and see what pieces you need to cut out. But this is why it all fits really compact in here, as well as with the instructions for the specific pattern project, right? Now, Angela's, the pattern pieces come in thicker white paper, so they won't rip as easily as the tissue paper might, okay? So this is definitely a plus if you're someone who tends to rip all your tissue paper patterns, right? So they're all gonna have differences and similarities, but at the end of the day, they're all patterns that you'll be able to trace out and cut out of your fabric, or to cut out directly from either the tissue or this sturdier white paper pattern. Another difference that I noticed is that Angela's patterns come in spiral bound books. So they're not just like open sheets where you're trying to flip through the pages and figure out, did I do that step already? Did I not? This is a spiral bound and it has pictures in it as the steps. You're not going to find pictures aside from the illustrated sketches or whatever on the commercial patterns. So from the independent designers, you tend to find a little bit more customization sometimes because they kind of know where to make the changes, and because it's their company, they can do whatever they want, right? So they know where to make the changes and where to change it up. So it might be easier for the consumer to follow along, to cut out the pieces, and to see exactly what each step entails because they have the capability of adding, you know, a picture in there, added little pop-up box that says, here's a tip, here's another technique that you can try out if you're struggling with this and things like that. So you don't typically see that kind of stuff on the commercial patterns. However, they do have some that are more geared towards beginners, and in those I find that they often put little blurbs and add some additional tips and tricks to help beginners along in the garment sewing process. And some of those patterns, I think I have one here. This is a Vogue. Like if you just buy a Vogue pattern, this one is very easy Vogue. So if you're just starting off and you want to try out some of these brands, you definitely want to look for the ones that are more beginner-friendly projects. Typically, they'll be simpler to sew. They'll have less seams. They'll have less pieces that you need to cut out. If you're trying to make yourself a top and you see it has 27 different pattern pieces, that's probably not going to be the best one for you to start off with. But this one is definitely not like that. So if it says very easy, great for beginners, that kind of thing, that's a great way to get started. This one is a new look, but it's a pretty simple one. You'll see, like when you go into the store, you'll see the ones that say easy sew, or they'll say like, make it in 2 hours, make it in 3 hours, make it in 4 hours, that kind of thing. Start off with those because that's typically a decent enough place to start for a beginner. Now, when you're looking at the big 4 patterns, there's also something a little bit differently. They don't just put out patterns from that are designed by their in-house designers. For example, here is a pants pattern by Vogue, and it's a Today's Fit pattern by Sandra Betsina. And Sandra Betsina is very famous and very popular for her workshops and her classes and her books and books and books and her techniques and things like that. And so she has a line of patterns for Vogue. Another one, let me see where it is the Tilton sisters. This is Marcy Tilton, and she designs for Vogue. And you can see up here, it'll have her branding. It says Marcy Tilton, Vogue Patterns Designer Original. And so these are kind of specialized patterns that these designers create in conjunction and collaboration with whatever the pattern company is. Now, going back to talking about the independent pattern designers, not all indie pattern companies sell you hard copy patterns. Some of them are solely PDF pattern shops and businesses, right? So one of them, for example, is Patterns for Pirates. Super great stuff. This is a t-shirt pattern, and because it's a PDF pattern, a few different things. Some people see them as pros and cons. One pro, I would say, is that as soon as you click it, it's a downloadable file. So if you have a night off free and you want to make the pattern, you can click, buy it, download it that same night, and be off and sewing, assuming you pre-washed your fabrics, right? Then you can just get started with your project right then and there without having to go to the store. Now, one of the things about PDF patterns that I find that some people still don't know about, and it catches them kind of off guard these days, is that there are, to create the pattern that is typically either a tissue paper or the other printed paper, because most of these patterns are going to be multi-sized, that means that whatever the design is, if it's a top, they're going to give you that top in multiple different sizes. That means that it's going to be like a smaller size, then a bigger one, graded out, and they just get bigger and bigger. So you need a large sheet of paper to cover all the sizes before you can go in, cut into it at your size, and then start making your garment. So what happens with the PDF patterns, and I'll show you here on a couple of pages, is that when it's a PDF, you got to print out all the pages and then stick them together by taping, by gluing, whatever it is, to combine them. This goes this way. You see D3, D3. This would overlap here, okay? And you can see how it starts to create then the pattern. All right? And you would do that for all the pages. Now, depending on the garment, sometimes you can see yourself taping together 40 pages, 38, depending on the size, right? And if it has long sleeves and it's a long dress, forget about it. You're gonna need your entire dining room table to tape that whole thing out. Now, there have been some changes in the indie pattern world of PDFs, which I know that P4P, Patterns for Pirates, does it, and that is that you can just overlap the pages. Whereas before, or still with some companies, you have to trim away and then overlap and then trim and glue or tape and overlap, and you have to be cutting slivers of the paper off before you can combine it to the next one. For this, you just print out the sheets and it saves you that step of trimming first. You can just overlap them with the grid lines that are on the paper and then continue on. So it does save you a little bit of time, but you still do have to put together all the 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper to create the finished pattern. So although you may find an online sale going on from some indie designer for their PDFs, or maybe you found them at a lower price than what the hard copy patterns will cost you, keep in mind that you do need to add that additional time to combine the pages before you can continue on with your garment. Now, I have found that some indie designers have been now offering the option of A0 as a PDF. So where you can print it out at home at 8.5 by 11, they will also give it to you in a massive sheet that you can just take the file on a little hard drive, or sometimes you can email it to a local copy shop, and they will print it out for you on their A0 paper, which saves you a ton of time. But again, it's still, you're gonna have to take a trip to the copy store, and then you're also gonna have to pay for it. And sometimes they can get a little pricey. So it just depends. Again, it's whether you have more time or you're willing to spend more money to get the pattern sheet if you're going the PDF route. Now, all these patterns here, for example, are multi-size, meaning when you turn them around, they'll tell you which size, based on measurements, you'll need the different materials for, whether it's fabric or interfacing or whatever notions, like this one calls for a button here. Whatever it is, it will tell you. Now, for the commercial patterns, you typically will find the sizing information on the front. And so this is for sizes 14 through 22, the pattern sizing sheets that are in this packet. The same thing goes for this Very Easy Vogue pattern. This is 14 through 20. So you have to make sure that you're getting the one that fits the sizing in your range before you actually leave the store with it, right? Now, the sizing information typically will be found somewhere here, and you'll see based on your actual body measurements how that represents in the sizing that this company uses. So here is sizes 6 through 20. You know that if your bust, waist, and hip measurement fall in size 6, then this pattern is not going to be for you because this starts at a size 14. So all these multi-size patterns, although they cover several different sizes, you have to still double check and make sure with your measurements that the packet that you're grabbing or ordering online includes the size that you need for your measurements. Now, if you see size 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and numbers like that, they won't necessarily correlate to what you wear in ready to wear. And by ready to wear, I mean garments that you're buying already from the store. You will often find that your size number, okay, is a lot larger in commercial patterns. So somebody who might wear a size 6 in the store, like they go to the store and buy a size 6 dress, is probably going to be looking at maybe a size 12 or 14 even on here, because that's the size medium that you would typically find. So don't freak out and think you've gained a ton of weight or that now your size is not really your size. Remember that when it comes to patterns, there's no real set scale of what the sizing should be. So we need to go by the actual measurements themselves and not really pay too much attention to how the pattern companies individually categorize the different measurements on their scale. There are some independent pattern designer companies that I know of that will have their sizing be letters, something that's completely different than numbers, so that people don't get that same feeling where you're like, I actually just wear a size 8. Why is this thing telling me to cut out a size 14? Now, one cool thing about using a multi-size pattern is that because you have the different sizes, then here's an example: extra small, small, medium, large, extra large. So if you fall anywhere within there on each of the different measurements or parts of the body that you have to measure, say bust, waist, and hips, you can grade in between the sizes. So you may not just be a small at the bust, small at the waist, and small at the hips. Say you're small busted, you have a small waist based on your measurements on that pattern, and then maybe your hip measurement is bigger than what the small calls for in the pattern, right? So you're not just going to cut a small all the way through, but because you have the multi-size, you'll be able to grade out from the small waist to whatever size at the hips you need to, because you have the space availability there in the built-in pattern that you can then use it. And so then at that point, you're basically cutting out your own custom pattern that will fit you, but by using all the measurements that have been provided for you in a multi-size pattern. Now, in my experience, unless you want to get into the world of pattern drafting and starting to create patterns on your own from your own body measurements, the commercially printed and graded patterns are a great place to start. But it can be daunting because there's so much information and it's quite overwhelming. Not to mention that if you pick up the wrong pattern to start with, you may be setting yourself up for a disaster. So if you found this information helpful, but it still may be a little bit daunting, definitely stay tuned. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button to my channel, because going forward, I will be bringing you a series of video tutorials where we're basically going to cover a lot of the stuff that goes into garment sewing. We're going to start off with some simple and beginner-friendly projects. We'll talk about fabric types, what fabrics you want to go with for specific types of patterns, right? Stretch knits versus wovens. We'll talk about needles and thread and all that kind of good stuff. But if you found this video helpful, make sure to hit it with the thumbs up below, share it with your friends across the different social media sites. And if you already sew your own garments using purchased patterns, go ahead and leave us a comment below and let us know what is your favorite pattern company, whether it's a big four or an indie pattern company, and why you love their patterns. Is it because maybe they grade the patterns to somebody of your size, your height, your bust measurement, or what is it exactly, so that those of us checking out the comments will be able to go in there and do some research, and maybe we'll find our new favorite pattern company. So thanks again for watching this video, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.